That sounds like Ron.
Check your pin, Rick.
Just of note, we are currently live and broadcasting. We haven't started the meeting quite yet. We'll be starting in about 4 minutes. It's advisable to mute until then.
I have no sound, Rick.
Can you hear me at all?
Oh, now I can.
The rest of us are muted, waiting for the meeting to start.
Glad to see some of the members are properly dressed, except Jamie and I.
I wear the necklace all the time now. Just getting used to it. All right, folks. It is now 7 o'clock. I will call the meeting to order of the 28th session of council on this Monday, May the 11th. Welcome to the virtual council meeting once again to all members of council, many members of staff, and any audience members that are out there watching. So welcome back to council. I'll start with a roll call. As I call out your name, just say hi and tell me what ward you're representing, just to keep things interesting. I'll start with, I'll just go by the order on my screen. So I'll start with Councillor Townend.
Present, Councillor Townend, Ward 1, Amherst Island.
Thank you. Go to Councillor Parks.
Ward 2, Carol Parks, present.
Thank you. Councillor Buderick.
Present, Council Buderick, Ward 3.
Thank you. Councillor Gordon.
Present Ron Gordon, Councillor Ward 3.
And Deputy Mayor.
Present, Deputy Mayor at large.
Thank you. And Councillor Porter indicated that she would not be available for this evening's meeting. I will say that in chambers with me is our clerk, Debbie Chapman, and the CAO, Steve Silver. And we, as you may note, we have half a dozen other directors or senior staff members available on the call as well. But they'll keep their cameras off until we need to call into them. That being said, moving to our agenda. There is no closed session today, as we've noted. So in the open forum, and my screen froze, there is no open forum tonight. If there are any members of the audience who wish to attend council, to wish to speak to council, we recommend that you contact the clerk at clerk@loyalist.ca or 613-386-7351 extension 120 to make arrangements to be a delegate before council. Thank you. There are no public meetings this evening, so we look for a confirmation of the agenda for this evening. Are there any edits or changes to the agenda noted? Seeing none, can I have a motion, please? Councillor Gordon, second by Councillor Parks. Okay. Any comments? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion is carried. Agenda is adopted. Is there any declaration of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof? I'll go to the Deputy Mayor.
Yes, thank you. I declare a conflict of interest on item 11.2 legal services, as there may be the perception of conflict of interest as one of the firms is retained by a family member.
Are there any other declarations of pecuniary interest? Seeing none, and I'm assuming the deputy will file the appropriate paperwork with the clerk.
I have filed it, yes.
Thank you. Moving to the minutes. Item 7.1, confirmation of the minutes of the 27th electronic session of April 27th. Are there any noted errors or omissions in those minutes? And Deputy?
Yes, in item 12.2, the seconder will need to be added in the final set of minutes.
And good call. There is no seconder listed. Thank you. I'm sure the clerk will take care of that. So noted. Do we know off the top of our head who the seconder was without going back through the notes? Not a problem right now, but you will record the seconder as was identified at the time. Thank you. Are there any other noted errors or omissions? Seeing none, can I get a motion to approve the minutes as amended? Councillor Buderick, seconded by Deputy Mayor. Any comments? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion is carried. Okay. This time we have a scheduled presentation from our auditors. Okay. Is that available? I'll go to the clerk. Thank you.
It's Kara, I'm here.
Thank
Do you want me
Thank
to share my
Kara.
screen?
And if you could share your screen and or share your video if possible.
Okay.
And will Ann be joining you as well?
Yeah, Anne is here as well.
Thank you. And then I'll turn the floor to you. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so hopefully everyone can see my screen.
We can.
Perfect.
Council
Okay, so
council members have notes on it as well. So.
okay, Great. So the objective today is we're going to go through our audit findings report to you. So we are substantially complete all of the work. So we'll discuss the results. We will communicate any matters you need to be aware of, and as well as discuss any other matters of interest. First thing to note is our audit opinion. So this is what goes at the start of the financial statements. And you'll see here that it's an unqualified or clean audit opinion. So pretty consistent with prior years. We've never had an issue. Management typically, if we find anything, it's typically gets corrected. So based on our materiality and posting threshold, their financial statements are not materially misstated. So there are no significant errors in them. The audit is complete pending the receipt of the management representation letter, which can't be signed until today. We have to have this conversation first, and then council's approval of the statements. We had no difficulties encountered during the course of our audit. There were no changes to the initial plan that we communicated and no disagreements with management. And there are no new auditing or accounting standards in 2019. In terms of the summary of our process, so this is what we do when we complete an audit. So we really look at the significant things that have a bigger risk of having mistakes in them, as well as the stuff that people really care about. So we do get an understanding of the controls used to make sure that they're appropriate for the entity size of the operations, as well as they make sense and things are properly segregated. And we've spent some time focusing on like revenue cutoff, making sure that government grants are recorded in the right period. We look at, as well, we spend quite a bit of time on developer contributed assets. And there had been errors in the past in that a couple of years ago, so we do spend a little bit of time there. In terms of the audit outcomes, there are no adjustments that we need corrected. There were no significant internal control weaknesses. And then we had a couple observations or improvements that we will provide to management. In terms of the actual results, so this is the balance sheet. So I always talk about this. It's called the statement of financial position. It's a fancy word for the balance sheet. So where are you at a point in time? It's a snapshot to December 31st of all the assets and liabilities. So I'll flip through the highlights. Sorry. So the net financial assets liability position has improved, partially due to an increase in financial assets. So financial assets are basically cash or things that are going to turn into cash. So there's an increase in the surplus during the year, an increase in government grants to cover capital additions, and a reduction or pay down of some of the debt. So there was a significant increase in tangible capital assets. So total asset additions were about $25 million. So this is the long-term assets. And some of the bigger items were the large projects such as Princeton Place, Compton Edgewood. So that was about 1.5 million. There was a significant amount of developer contributed assets. So these are the assets that the developers build, and at the end, when they're all done, they contribute them over to the town. That included almost 13 million for the gravel road. And then this is offset by amortization expense and small disposals of capital assets. There was also an increase in deferred revenue. So this is money you get that it's specifically set aside for certain things. And so there was an increase because of the federal gas tax due to additional 500,000 in funding received as a one-time funding. And then there were some smaller projects completed after the year. Okay. Here's just a history of your capital asset additions. So you can see a very significant increase in 2019. The majority of those were the developer contributed assets. And as we talked about, 13 million for the gravel road. Okay. This is the breakdown of where you're spending your money in terms of capital asset additions. So you can see the biggest one here is roads at 24%, matched with the water systems at 24%. Again, a lot of that's going to be developer contributed. So when they're building, for example, a new subdivision and they build all the water support systems and you contribute that over to the town at the end, you guys own those assets. So same thing with sanitary systems as well. A lot of that would be developer contributed assets. Here is the surplus for the year. So you had at the end of the year, there was an accumulated, so over time, over history, there's an accumulated operating surplus of 3 million. Net investment in tangible capital assets of about 144 million, and total reserves were 1.4 million, and total reserve funds were 13 million. Okay, and that's all the various reserve funds that are set aside for specific items. So you can see here on the right, the general rate with the Violet landfill, the fire training center, the municipal capital fund. So that's money that's set aside for specific things by council. And this is the statement of operations. So fancy word for income statement. So this is how it turned out this year. So the annual surplus is actually about $26 million. Property tax revenues and pills increased by 7%. That is consistent with the previous year increase as well. User charges were increased by 8%, also consistent with the previous year. Significant increase in government grants, which we did go down to the funding agreements and look at those, so in accordance with those agreements. And then there were some actual revenues higher than budgeted due to new revenues from the road use agreement, frontage fees, and funding for the wind electric and community vibrancy funds. The increase in total expenses, though, is pretty consistent with the budget. So you came in very, very close to budget on expenses. So budget was about 31 million. You came in just under, just shy of that 31 million. But revenues were up, so that helped. This is where you're spending the majority of your expenses. So if we break it down by all the different categories, the majority, 31% is in your transportation, 29% is in environmental. So those are the biggest ones, followed by protection at 17%. In terms of the audit findings, so overall, there's an improvement in the net financial asset liability, improvement in the operating surplus. Capital asset consumption ratio represents moderately new infrastructure. So what that means is, how old are all those assets, right? You have a significant amount of millions of dollars of assets on the balance sheet. How old are they in terms of the roads and the buildings? So they're moderately new in terms of and it's consistent with the year before. Total capital asset additions were significant at just under 25 million, but that included 19 million of contributed developer assets. So it's not that you spent 25 million on cash. A lot of that was contributed by the developers. Majority expenses related to transportation environmental services, consistent with last year, consistent with your budget, and there are no significant accounting standard developments to note. So that is the brief summary of the audit findings. We had just to comment, we had a lot of support from management. So, I'd like to thank everyone in the finance group. And, we do go around and annoy people and ask them lots of questions and get lots of backup, but everyone's always very polite and we're very helpful throughout the audit. So thank you. I thank management for their time. So I will now open it up if anyone has questions. Anne is our manager. She is on the audit as well, and she's on the call if she can answer. And I know the finance team is here as well.
Thank you very much, Ms. Chesney. I'll turn to council. Do you have any questions for the auditors at this time? With the sharing of screen, I can only see 4 of the members of council, so you'll have to yell if you do have one. Thank you.
I think my mic may have been muted earlier, but I am on the call as well.
Thank you very much, Anne. So any member of council have a question with regard to the audit statement? Seeing none, at this time or a little later, we'll be looking for a motion to receive and approve those. I think that's a little later under 11.1. Okay. So then I'll look for a motion to receive the auditor's report. And from the deputy, seconded by Councillor Townsend. Right. Any comments? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion is carried, and I will say thank you to both Kara and Anne for being online and being available to provide this presentation, and for the excellent work you do every year with the audits. Thank you. With that, we will move forward. Next up is under business services and the treasurer. 11.1 is the 2019 year-end financial statements. We have a report from Ms. McNevin. And I believe Mr. Dickey is on the line with us if there are any questions. We have the report before us with the recommendations. And council, do you have any questions before we move to a motion? Seeing none, right, then I'll look for a motion for 11.1. I'll go to the deputy mayor for the motion. And do I have a seconder? Councillor Parks. Right. Mover, do you have any comments with it? Seconder? No? Anyone else? Then I will call the question on the financial recommendations. All right, all those in favor? Any opposed? Motion is carried unanimously. I thank you very much. And then I'll move forward to item 11.2. We have one declaration of pecuniary interest. And we have a report from Ms. O'Neill with a recommendation with regard to how we acquire our legal services. Okay. Are there any questions for, I guess, for the CAO with regard to that? I see no questions. Then I'll look for a motion to approve the recommendation. Councillor Townend, seconded by Councillor Buderick. Mover, do you have any comments? Go ahead.
Yeah, I do. I wanted to say that I think it's a prudent measure. And I wanted to extend credit actually to the CAO because since he has taken office, he had targeted legal services as a site of improvement from the perspective of getting good value for money for the corporation and ultimately the ratepayer. And likewise, the best possible advice regarding our legal needs and obligations. I think that this report confirms that ongoing work. And in consideration of the fact that legal services is certainly not cheap, but are nevertheless an important part of government administration across all levels, it is desirable to have a discerning outlook for value for service and generate a competitive market among local firms. So I therefore support the approach and thereby the report.
Thank you. Seconder, did you have comment?
Nothing really, just I'm very much behind this as well. And dealing with the past people we dealt with, I had a certain perception, and I'm glad we're doing this just to take a better look at things.
Thank you. Any other comments at this time? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you. Now I'll invite the Deputy Mayor to come back. And item 11.3, we have a report on the COVID-19 projected net financial impact. The report is from Mr. Renier, and he is here to answer any questions we may have from him. Council, do you have any questions? I'm seeing no hands. I'll be honest, when I read that report, it wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. So I thank Mr. Renier for doing that, and Mr. Dickey, of course. Do I have a motion to receive the report for information? Councillor Buderick, seconded by Councillor Parks. Any comments? None. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion is carried. And we move to 11.4, a report regarding the penalty and interest relief on taxation and utility bills. We have a report from Mr. Dickey. And you will note that the recommendation is an or recommendation, either recommendation 1 or 2. Right. Before we move to a motion, are there any questions with regards to this? Seeing none, I'll look for a motion on 11.4. Councillor Townend.
I motion to receive the report from the Director of Business Services and adopt recommendation number 1.
And recommendation number 1, that no additional extension of due dates be granted. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Buderick. Mover, comments?
Yeah, I think doing what we did initially was the right move. I think it was an important and critical gesture to recognize the financial strain the pandemic had immediately right off the bat. And especially since other levels of government were still in various stages of developing larger relief packages. However, another month of this particular plan will cost the municipality a total of around $70,000, which will be added to the existing and expected shortfall of $170,000 by the end of May alone. As we cannot run deficits, which really is a critical piece here, We would have to find savings for this somehow. And inevitably, as always, that involves robbing Peter to pay Paul. I think I would have been prepared to do this for another month were it not for the fact that the uptake has been relatively low. No utility users have altered their pre-authorized payments to date, and only 18 tax accounts have either suspended pre-authorized payments specifically or delayed in some way due to the pandemic. And still no one has requested other forms of a payment plan. So property taxes are, of course, a regressive tax. That is, they disproportionately affect lower income families for sure, as indeed they do not take income into account. That is the nature of the beast, so to speak, over which we as members of council have no control. However, as a municipality, we have always, even prior to the pandemic, encouraged taxpayers with specific financial constraints to enter into payment plans with the township, which can be uniquely tailored to individual needs. I think if there are those continuing to struggle further as a result of lost or reduced employment from the pandemic, we would be better to encourage those residents to enter into agreements with the township, and that it might in fact be in their better interest than simply delaying interest and penalty charges, which really do nothing to remove the real and inevitable burden of the taxes themselves. I think I should conclude by saying that in no way are we as council unsympathetic to struggling residents. I simply think that based on the evidence presented in the report, that there are other options available for individual taxpayers that would better serve them and the considerable financial constraints on the corporation itself going forward.
Thank you, Councillor Townend. Councillor Budrick, did you have a comment, a seconder?
No, I do not. He was very detailed. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other comments? Deputy Mayor.
Yes, I'm just going to state that I'm not going to support the motion as it stands. I believe there are people out there that are being impacted, and they may have been able to stay afloat so far, but the impacts of either lost business or reduced wages is going to accumulate the further this goes. And so I think another month to be able to allow them the opportunity to be able to take part in this, I believe that would be the right way to go. So I'm not supporting it at this time.
Thank you. Other comments? Back to the mover for final. And I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion is carried. We move on. Item number 14.1. An updated sludge hauling agreement. We have a report from Ms. Buck. Right. Requesting permission to move into some contracted arrangements. Right. Are there any questions with regard to this report at this time? Seeing none, I'll look for a mover. Councillor Budrick, seconded by Deputy Mayor. Any comment? Mover?
No, it's a very detailed motion, and all the details are in there, which is great.
Thank you. Seconder? Anyone else? And then I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion is carried. And we move to item 14.2, the request for securities reduction from 216-222 Main Street, Bath. We have a report from Mr. Grant. And we have staff available for questions if needed. Right. Before we get into the motion, are there any questions on this particular issue? Seeing none, I look for a motion. Councillor Townend, seconded by Deputy Mayor. Mover?
Yeah, I would motion to receive the report from the engineering supervisor and adopt the recommendation number 1, that the request be denied.
So moved. Seconder?
Sorry, no, I'm not seconding that. It was an or, and so I had my hand up.
You're right, and I should have specified that. Right. So the motion before us is the first half of the recommendation, which is that the request for a site plan securities reduction be denied. That is the motion. Do I have a seconder for that? Final call. Do I have a seconder for that? Motion is that does not get second, does not continue. Do I have a follow-up motion? Deputy?
Move to receive the report and adopt the recommendation, the last part, to roll the into phase 2 with the securities being held back as required.
And so noted, so moved. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Parks, move or comment?
Just very briefly that I think this is a good move, and I appreciate staff's investigation into this and the report back. As we'd stated before, these are sort of a case-by-case basis, and I believe that allowing them to, the township to still hold securities, but roll it into phase 2 to increase the investment into our municipality is an asset.
Thank you. Seconder, do you have comment?
Yes, I just wanted to mention that we'd already done this recently with another property in the Odessa area. So I thought just to follow suit that it works well with what the recommendations are.
Thank you. Are there any other comments at this time? Councillor Townend.
Yeah, I don't think I'll be supporting the motion. I mean, I understand that there's a drive to be a more open for business mentality in Loyalist, and that involves having good working relationships with developers. But I mean, policies are policies, and security policies are fairly standard development policies. I think if there is need for greater flexibility in our policies, the policies need to be adjusted. I think what's going to happen if we continue to do this on a case-by-case basis, we're just going to get more cases, and we're going to get ourselves tied up in knots. And we're going to get further examples of a case that was named in the report, well, not named, but referred to or alluded to in the report, where we get stuck with remediation work because there's still work to be completed after having released the securities. So I just don't think it's a good practice, despite the fact that it may be perfectly adequate to this particular situation. That's just a general policy perspective that I think we need to be consistent on. But I defer, obviously, to colleagues.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other comments? I'll go back to the mover. Nothing? I'll call the question. All those in favor of the motion to, and just for clarity, motion to direct that securities from phase 1 less 20% of the remaining phase 1 works be rolled into phase 2 as per the engineer's estimate dated May 7th. Call the question. All those in favor? And opposed? Thank you. Motion is carried. Moving forward, we get up to the consent agenda. For the purpose of convenience and expediting meetings, matters of business that are repetitive or routine in nature are included in the consent agenda, and all such matters of business contained in the consent agenda are voted on collectively. A particular matter of business may be singled out from the consent agenda by any member of, by request of any member of council. In the case of a separate vote, the excluded matter of business is severed from the consent agenda, and each and every matter of business contained in the consent agenda is recorded as separately in the minutes. Is there anything within the consent agenda that members of council wish to extract? Seeing none, I look for a motion to approve the consent agenda. And Councillor Townend, seconded by Councillor Gordon. Right. Mover, any comment? Seconder, any comment? Anyone else? And I'll call the question on the consent agenda. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion is carried. Moves us down to members' privilege. Is there anyone who would like to bring forth anything under members' privilege? And I'll start with Councillor Gordon. Go ahead. And we can't hear you, Councillor Gordon. You're on mute. There you go.
Well, I wasn't on mute. Just me and electronics. I spoke about the Lionhearts organization that has been coming out now and working with the good folks in Amherst in particular at the Recreation Center. So hats off to the staff and yourself, Mr. Mayor, for helping to coordinate this. I would say they've got off to a good start, and they're gaining momentum here. The first day they served 105 meals. Second day they were open, they had 133, I think it was. Third day, 175. And they were kind enough to invite me to come up and participate and see the program firsthand. It's very well organized. They take every precaution, of course. And happy to say that the last day they served 225 meals. So folks are coming in, picking up the parcels, and then some of them are delivering, so there's fewer people coming. And I just think it's a great program. So hats off to everyone who's participating and who made it happen.
It's excellent that it's there and available, and it's unfortunate that it's needed, but we're definitely glad it's there to provide that service. Thank you, Councillor Gordon. Is there anything else under members' privilege from you?
No.
Okay, then I'll go to Councillor Townend.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to notify the residents of Ward 1 in particular that today the township had received word from the Ministry of Transportation that the Communications Committee newsletter that has been expected at the beginning of May will be delayed further. Unfortunately, this is out of the control of the regional office. The newsletter is required to be approved by the minister's office in Toronto, and that is expected to take some time. A lot of that has to do with messaging around COVID-19. Obviously, the provincial government wants to keep a lot of things centralized in terms of communication around that, and inevitably issues affecting the ferry construction vis-a-vis the docks and also the arrival of the new vessel are being determined by COVID-related aspects. And so all that to say that information will be coming, but it will be delayed, unfortunately, due to simply the nature of how government works. But I wanted residents to be aware of that came down to myself and to staff and to the mayor today. So,
yeah. Thank you very much for bringing that forward. Is there anything else under members' privilege at this time? Well, I don't see any from you, but I do have one. I wanted to bring to your attention the issue of the boat ramps and boat launches in Loyalist Township. As you are aware, they were closed due to the COVID crisis and closed in tandem with our neighboring municipalities and the provincial decisions with regard to that. Well, we finalized the decision today during the emergency control group meeting that the boat launches will be reopening on May the 15th. Right, so they will be available. We understand that our neighboring municipalities are doing similar. And so again, the ultimate concern is that if one area has boat launches open, that becomes a point of concentration, a point where people from outside the region start to gather and to potentially spread the infection, which is what we were trying to avoid. So by having all municipalities in the area open approximately the same time, hopefully it will spread that concentration and continue to flatten the curve as well as we have done so far. I did want to also to bring forward the idea that during our weekly meeting with Dr. Moore, it was repeated that we are currently in a situation where all 61 cases of COVID-19 have been, I've lost my term, are cleared. So there are no active cases in this KFLNA region right now, which is an absolutely wonderful statement. That does not say that we are completely out of the woods, of course. There is still potential transmission from people traveling. We know that suppliers are coming in and out as needed. So we want to continue to stay safe and stay careful. But I think the messaging that we're about to see is where it has been stay home, stay safe. It will kind of transition and to stay local, stay safe. Right? So hopefully we can, as time moves forward, we can start having small businesses open, keep people shopping locally, improve our local economy as well as we can, and so that the economy doesn't just survive, it revives and it thrives. So I'm stealing slogans from the Economic Development Coalition now. So all this is good news. We're not completely out of the woods, obviously, but we've done such a good job. All of us, all of our residents, all of the people in the region have done such a good job at keeping that social distance, keeping the hand hygiene and things of that nature going, that we have very much flattened the curve, and we can continue to do so while starting to reopen things. We have also posted a guideline for seasonal residents. And of course, we are still encouraging people that have secondary residences to be honest, stay away, right? To stay in their primary residences and stay where they have access to their own medical care and not have to come here and potentially spread or rely on our medical services. That being said, if people, that is a recommendation. So if people choose to come to that secondary residence, we have provided some guidelines on isolation and to keep them and us safe. So we hope that everyone continues to stay safe and stay healthy and stay local. So that's the end of my members' privilege statements. So anything else from anyone? Moving forward, our upcoming meetings, we are scheduled for May the 25th for a regular council meeting, and we are looking forward to restarting the Committee of Adjustment on June the 1st. Okay. If there's nothing else, then I'll look for a motion for the confirmatory bylaw. Councillor Buderick, seconded by Deputy Mayor. Right. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion is carried. I look for a motion for adjournment. Councillor Townend, seconded by Councillor Gordon. Right. Call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion is carried. We are adjourned, folks. Have a good evening. Thank you for tuning in.